Our top saleswoman vanished after finding proof our CFO stole $3 million. When they demolished the wall, police found her phone still recording. Our top saleswoman, Christina, hadn't shown up for 3 days. Management said she'd quit for a better opportunity. But Christina was about to make partner. Just closed our biggest deal ever. Getting married next month. Why leave everything without a word? Her fiancé Derek blocked me after saying they'd taken a break. So I started looking, hidden in Christina's desk, folder labeled evidence. 2 years of emails showing CFO Brad embezzled $3 million. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, diverted commissions, last document, email from Brad to Christina, night she disappeared. Got your message. Come to my office. Let's keep this between us. Security logs. Christina badged in at 9:02 p.m. According to system, she never left. Car found at airport, but she never boarded any flight. Parking garage cameras malfunctioned 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. 6 hours blank. Brad acting strange since. Working late, shredding documents. Overheard him. She's handled. Situation contained. No one else knows. But Brad wasn't alone with secrets. Christina was having an affair with CEO Jericho 6 months. His wife had PI photos. Divorce would cost him $30 million plus company control. Without Christina testifying, case collapses. Found Christina's laptop hidden in server room. Search history. Whistleblower protection. Report corporate fraud, FBI. Can they kill me for knowing too much? She'd downloaded everything to USB drive. Drive was gone. Tom, head of security, had fresh arm scratches that Monday. Cat got me. Tom doesn't have cats. Ex-Special Forces. Reported the camera malfunction. Derek finally talked. Drunk. She was getting threats. Someone broke in. Night before disappearing, gave me USB drive. Said if anything happened, take to FBI. Still have it? Someone took it. Only thing missing. Janitor Eddie pulled me aside. Saw her that night. Someone forcing her toward freight elevator. Heard her say, "You don't have to do this. Please." Went to basement alone. Renovation area supposedly empty. Found Christina's engagement ring on floor. Diamond cracked. Drag marks to corner wall. Wall with fresh mortar. Lighter than surrounding brick. Next morning, Jericho announced Brad promoted to Singapore immediately. Tom getting massive raise. Basement demolition starting tomorrow. Tearing down all walls. Drove to FBI with everything. Returned to find security escorting me out. Planted evidence I'd been selling secrets. Note on my pillow that night. Stop looking or join her. But I'd made copies. Hidden with trusted people. FBI raid came at dawn. Arrested Brad at airport. Jericho in handcuffs. Tom taken from apartment. Found Christina behind that fresh bricked wall. Strangled with her scarf. But killer didn't know something. USB drive still in her pocket. They'd panicked. Missed it. And her phone. Still recording. 93 minutes. Her conversation with killer. Pleading. Struggle. Final moments. FBI played recording for me. Needed voice identification. Listened to Christina's terror. Confusion. Then heard killer speak. My body went cold. Wasn't Brad. Wasn't Jericho. Wasn't Tom. Someone who'd been helping me investigate. Feeding me information while ensuring I never found truth. Someone I trusted completely. The killer had been with me this whole time. Watching me search, guiding me away from real evidence, making sure I suspected everyone except them. They knew exactly what I was finding because I told them everything, every discovery, every lead, every suspicion. That's how they stayed ahead. That's how evidence got planted on me so fast. That's how they knew to leave that note. FBI agent leaned forward. You recognize this voice? Couldn't answer. Throat closed. The voice saying Christina's name softly before static. I'd heard it every day. trusted it, confided in it. They'd offered to help me search for truth while covering their tracks, pointed me toward Brad's embezzlement to hide their own crime, fed me Jericho's affair to muddy waters, highlighted Tom's suspicious behavior as distraction, all while knowing exactly where Christina was, because they'd put her there. The recording captured something else. Background noise during struggle, a phone ringing, my ringtone. Because I'd been calling Christina's phone that night, trying to find her. The killer answered it, said 2 words before hanging up. Wrong number. I remember that call. Remember the voice saying those words. Remember thinking nothing of it. Remember who I was with when I made that call. The person sitting across from me at the bar, helping me search for Christina. The person who suggested checking her desk for clues. Who pointed out Brad's strange behavior. Who mentioned Tom's scratches. The person who had access to everything because I gave it to them. Every piece of evidence. Every theory. Every move I was going to make. They played me perfectly. And Christina died because of it. The FBI agent slid a photo across the table. Security footage from that night. 2 figures by the freight elevator. Christina stumbling. Someone supporting her. The timestamp. 10:47 p.m. Exactly when I was calling Christina's phone. Exactly when someone answered. The second figure's face was turned away from camera, but I knew that stance, that walk, those clothes. I try to say her name, but nothing comes out. My mouth opens, closes. Cartwright's eyes are locked on mine, waiting. The recording keeps playing in the background, Christina's voice begging, pleading, and then that other voice, Imogen's voice. The same voice that sat across from me at Murphy's bar 3 weeks ago, suggesting we start looking into Brad's financial records. The same voice that said we should check Tom's background. The same voice that answered Christina's phone that night and told me, wrong number, while Christina was dying 10 feet away. Cartwright leans back in his chair, and I watch his whole body shift. His shoulders straighten. His jaw tightens. He's not patient anymore, not gentle. He knows I've figured it out. Who is it? His voice cuts through the fog in my head. Imogen! The word scrapes out of my throat like broken glass. Imogen Salter. She works in accounting. She's been helping me investigate. Cartwright's already reaching for his radio before I finish the sentence. He barks orders into it, unit numbers and codes I don't understand. I hear him say her name, her address, her car description. Then he stops, listens. His face goes hard. She left work 2 hours ago. Family emergency. He looks at me. When did you tell her about contacting us? Yesterday. I told her yesterday. Sitting in the break room, relieved, thinking I'd finally done the right thing. Imogen had smiled and squeezed my hand and said I was brave. Said Christina would be proud, the whole time knowing the FB I would find her body, knowing they'd have the recording, knowing I'd just signed her arrest warrant. She'd hugged me goodbye when I left work. I can still feel her arms around my shoulders. Yesterday afternoon, I managed to say. Around 3, Cartwright swears under his breath. He's already moving, pulling files from a folder, spreading photos across the table, security footage, timestamps in the corner. He taps one with his finger. This is from the night Christina disappeared. 10:47 p.m. I lean forward. 2 figures by the freight elevator. One is Christina. I'd know her anywhere, even in grainy security footage. She's stumbling, her legs barely working. The other figure is supporting her, one arm around her waist. The face is turned away from the camera, but I know that posture, that walk, the way she holds her shoulders back. Imogen. She offered to work late that night, I say. My voice sounds far away. Said she wanted to catch up on paperwork. Her office was right next to Christina's. Cartwright pulls out another photo. This one shows Imogen's face clearly, taken from a different angle. She's looking down at Christina with an expression I can't read. Not angry, not scared, just focused, like she's solving a problem. She drugged her, Cartwright says. Christina's coffee. We found traces of benzodiazepines in her system, enough to make her compliant, but not unconscious. Imogen needed her to walk to the basement. I remember Imogen bringing me coffee during the investigation. Every morning for 3 weeks. I drank every cup. My stomach turns over. Cartwright keeps talking, pulling more documents from the folder. Bank records, financial statements, account numbers in countries I've never heard of. Imogen wasn't covering for Brad or Jericho, he says. She was running her own scheme. Smaller than Brad's, but cleaner. 5 years of fake consulting contracts, inflated expense reports, kickbacks from vendors. She'd stolen almost $2 million. Christina figured it out first, before she found Brad's embezzlement. That's what got her killed. The timeline clicks into place in my head. Christina discovered Imogen's theft, then found Brad's bigger scheme, tried to report both, but Imogen got to her first. Made it look like Brad or Jericho or Tom had something to do with it. Fed me just enough information to keep me looking in the wrong direction while she cleaned up her tracks. She played me, I say. Every single conversation, every lead she gave me. She was using me to build cases against everyone else. Cartwright nods. When you started investigating, she saw an opportunity. Guide you toward Brad's embezzlement. Point out Jericho's affair. Highlight Tom's suspicious behavior. Make sure you suspected everyone except her, and you told her everything you found. I did. Every discovery, every theory, every piece of evidence. I handed it all to her because I trusted her, because she seemed so concerned, so helpful, so determined to find out what happened to Christina. The whole time she knew exactly where Christina was, because she'd put her there. 6 hours. That's how long Cartwright keeps me in that office. We go through every conversation I had with Imogen during the investigation. He records everything, taking notes, asking questions. When did she suggest checking Christina's desk? What exactly did she say about Brad's behavior? How did she react when I found the evidence folder? Every detail matters now. Every word she said was calculated. I tell him about the day I found Christina's engagement ring in the basement. Imogen had been with me that morning, suggesting we check the renovation area. She'd stayed upstairs, said she needed to make some calls. Now I understand why. She'd already been down there, already knew what I'd find. She wanted me to find the ring, to find the fresh mortar, to suspect Tom or Brad or Jericho. She was directing the whole investigation from the start. When Imogen suggested I check Christina's desk, she'd already been through it. Cartwright shows me photos of Christina's real files, recovered from her home computer. Evidence of Imogen's theft going back 5 years. Detailed spreadsheets, copied emails, account numbers, all of it gone from Christina's work desk. Imogen had removed anything pointing to herself before sending me to look. The scratches on Tom's arms. Cartwright explains that Imogen had attacked Tom when he walked in on her sealing the wall. She'd threatened to frame him for Christina's murder if he didn't help with the camera malfunction. Tom had been terrified of her. Still is. My phone buzzes. Cartwright glances at it, then at me. Imogen? I check. It's a text from her, sent 20 minutes ago. Hope you're okay. Let me know if you need anything. She's still pretending, still playing the concerned friend. My hands shake as I show Cartwright the screen. He makes a call. 3 hours later, they find her at the airport. Fake passport, ticket to a country without extradition, 2 bags packed with cash, and a laptop full of encrypted files. She'd been ready to run the moment she heard about the FBI raid. My conversation with her yesterday had just moved up her timeline. Cartwright brings me to a different room. One-way glass looking into an interrogation room. Imogen sits at a metal table, hands folded in front of her. She looks calm, professional, like she's waiting for a meeting to start. the same expression she wore when we'd meet for coffee to discuss the investigation. When she'd comfort me about Christina, when she'd praise my detective work, I watch her through the glass and feel nothing. Not anger, not betrayal, just empty. Cartwright stands beside me, quiet, letting me process. Two other agents are in the interrogation room with Imogen. They're talking, but I can't hear through the glass. Imogen's face doesn't change. She could be discussing the weather. Then Cartwright plays the recording. I can't hear it, but I watch Imogen's face. For the first time, something cracks. Her jaw tightens. Her eyes shift to the side. When they show her the security footage, she closes her eyes. Just for a second. When she opens them again, the calm mask is back. She talks for 40 minutes. Cartwright turns on the speaker so I can hear. Her voice is flat, businesslike. She explains how Christina had discovered the fake consulting contracts, how Christina had confronted her privately, giving her a chance to make it right, how Imogen had realized Christina would never stay quiet. Not really. Too honest. Too principled. So Imogen had made a choice. She describes drugging Christina's coffee, calling her to Brad's office with a fake emergency about the embezzlement Christina had also discovered, walking Christina to the freight elevator, supporting her, talking softly about getting her help, taking her to the basement. Christina had started to understand what was happening, had begged her to stop, had said they were friends. Imogen's response, captured on the recording, was simple. You know too much. I can't let you ruin everything I built. Imogen admits to strangling Christina with her own scarf, to bricking up the wall while Christina's body was still warm, to going home and sleeping fine that night, to coming back the next morning and expressing concern when Christina didn't show up for work, to volunteering to help me investigate when I started asking questions, to using my determination to build cases against Brad and Jericho and Tom while she stayed invisible. She never says she's sorry, never shows remorse, just explains it all like a failed business strategy. Christina was a problem. Imogen solved it. I was useful. She used me. Now she's caught. These things happen. Cartwright turns off the recording. Silence fills the observation room. I watch Imogen through the glass. Her hands still folded, her face blank. She looks like she's waiting for a conference call to start, not like someone who just confessed to murder. Cartwright moves closer to the glass and taps it once with his knuckle. The sound makes me jump. He doesn't look at me when he speaks. He tells me Imogen started her scheme 5 years ago. Small amounts at first. Fake consulting contracts with companies that didn't exist. She'd bill the company, approve her own invoices, collect the money. No one noticed because the amounts were small enough to hide in the budget. Over time, she got bolder. Bigger contracts. More fake vendors. By the time she killed Christina, she'd stolen over $2 million. I ask how Christina found out. Cartwright explains that Christina was reviewing vendor contracts for the big deal she'd just closed. She noticed patterns in Imogen's approvals. Same invoice formats, similar company names, all registered to P.O. boxes. Christina started digging, found the fake businesses, traced the money to offshore accounts. She confronted Imogen 3 days before she disappeared. Gave her a chance to return the money and resign quietly. Told her she didn't want to destroy her life, but couldn't let the theft continue. Imogen promised to think about it. Asked for 48 hours. Christina agreed. That's when Imogen decided Christina had to die. She couldn't trust Christina to stay quiet. Too honest. Too principled. The kind of person who'd eventually go to the authorities no matter what promises she made. So Imogen made a plan. She knew Christina had also discovered Brad's embezzlement, saw an opportunity to use that as cover. She drugged Christina's coffee that evening, called her to Brad's office with a fake emergency about the embezzlement evidence. Christina was already feeling sick from the drugs when she arrived. Imogen told her Brad was destroying documents in the basement, said they needed to catch him in the act, walked Christina to the freight elevator, supported her when she stumbled, talked softly about getting her help, took her to the basement renovation area where no one would hear. Christina started to understand what was happening when they reached the empty space, started to pull away, begged Imogen to stop, said they were friends, asked why she was doing this. Imogen's answer is on the recording: cold, practical, businesslike. Christina knew too much, couldn't be trusted, had to die. Simple as that. The recording captures Christina's terror, her confusion, her desperate attempts to reason with someone she thought she knew. Then the sounds of struggle, Christina fighting back, Imogen strangling her with her own scarf, taking several minutes. Christina's final gasps, then silence, then my ringtone. Imogen answering Christina's phone, saying those 2 words before hanging up. Wrong number. I remember that moment, sitting at the bar with Imogen, calling Christina's phone again, hoping she'd answer, someone picking up, that voice saying wrong number, hanging up, Imogen across from me, suggesting we check Christina's desk tomorrow, maybe find some clues, playing me perfectly. Cartwright tells me Imogen spent the next hour bricking up the wall. She'd prepared everything in advance: mortar, bricks, tools, worked fast. Tom walked in on her just as she was finishing. She attacked him, scratched his arms, threatened to frame him for Christina's murder if he didn't help with the cover-up. Tom was terrified, ex-military but scared of her, believed she'd destroy him, so he helped, reported the camera malfunction, got the security footage erased, kept his mouth shut. Imogen went home that night, showered, changed clothes, slept fine, came to work the next morning, expressed concern when Christina didn't show up, volunteered to help me investigate when I started asking questions, used my determination, my grief, my need for answers, guided me toward Brad's embezzlement, pointed out Jericho's affair, highlighted Tom's suspicious behavior, fed me exactly what she wanted me to find, kept me busy building cases against everyone except her, stayed invisible, safe, in control, until the FBI found Christina's body, found the phone still recording, found the USB drive in her pocket, heard Imogen's voice, saw her on the security footage, caught her trying to flee the country. Cartwright opens the door to the interrogation room, tells me to come with him. We walk down a hallway, white walls, fluorescent lights. He stops at another door, opens it. Tom sits inside at a metal table. His head is down, hands shaking. When he sees me, he starts crying, tells me he's sorry, says he was scared, thought Imogen would kill him too. Cartwright sits down across from Tom, asks him to explain what happened. Tom describes walking into the basement that night, seeing Imogen bricking up the wall, asking what she was doing. She turned on him, attacked him, scratched his arms, told him Christina was dead behind the wall, said if he told anyone, she'd plant evidence making him look like the killer. Ex-Special Forces, security expert. But he believed her, saw how calm she was, how prepared, realized she'd planned everything, got scared, agreed to help, reported the camera malfunction, made sure footage got erased, kept quiet when I started investigating, watched me search, wanted to tell me the truth, was too afraid. Cartwright asks about the scratches. Tom says he told everyone his cat did it, didn't have a cat, knew people would notice eventually, hoped they wouldn't ask too many questions. I ask Tom why he didn't come to me, tell me the truth. He looks at me with red eyes, says he thought about it every day, almost told me a dozen times, but Imogen was always watching, always nearby. She'd remind him what would happen if he talked, show him fake evidence she'd prepared, make it clear she was serious. So he stayed quiet, hated himself, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, lived in terror. Cartwright takes me to another room. Jericho sits there, suit wrinkled, face pale. He looks older than he did last week. Defeated. Cartwright asks him about Christina. Jericho admits they were having an affair. 6 months. His wife found out. Hired a private investigator. Got photos. Threatened divorce. $30 million plus company control. Jericho was desperate to keep it quiet. When Christina disappeared, he suspected his wife had done something. Maybe hired someone. He was too scared to push for answers. Thought if he stayed quiet, his wife might not follow through with the divorce. So he ignored the signs. Let Brad get promoted to Singapore. Gave Tom a raise. Authorized the basement demolition. Did everything to make the problem go away. I ask if he knew about Imogen. He shakes his head. Says he never suspected her. Thought she was just a helpful colleague. Someone trying to support me during a difficult time. Never imagined she was the killer. Cartwright shows me Brad's statement. Brad confesses he was terrified when Christina disappeared. Thought Jericho had her killed to protect his marriage. That's why he tried to flee to Singapore. Wasn't running from his embezzlement. Was running from what he thought was a murder conspiracy. He'd been shredding documents about his own crimes, trying to cover his tracks before Jericho decided to eliminate him too. Never suspected Imogen. Never knew she was stealing money. Never imagined she'd killed Christina. Just thought he was next on Jericho's list. 3 weeks later, I'm sitting in a grand jury room. 23 people staring at me. Prosecutor asks me questions. I describe everything I found, every piece of evidence, every conversation with Imogen, how she guided my investigation, how she used my determination, how thoroughly she fooled me. Describing it out loud makes me feel sick, stupid, blind. The prosecutor is gentle but persistent, walks me through every detail. Every moment I trusted Imogen, every time I confided in her, every lead she gave me that pointed away from herself. The grand jury listens. Some take notes, some just stare. I can't tell what they're thinking. If they blame me, if they think I should have known, if they understand how completely she manipulated me. After 4 hours of testimony, they let me leave. I walk out feeling empty, humiliated, used. The next day, Gregory Woodard calls me in. Top company attorney, expensive suit, cold eyes. He sits across from me in a conference room, asks me what I knew and when I knew it. I explain everything again, finding the evidence folder, discovering Brad's embezzlement, learning about Jericho's affair, noticing Tom's scratches, going to the basement, finding Christina's ring, calling the FBI. Woodard takes notes, asks follow-up questions, wants to know why I didn't report through proper channels immediately, why I investigated on my own, why I involved Imogen. I tell him I thought I was doing the right thing, thought I was helping, didn't know who to trust. He nods, writes more notes, tells me the company is conducting an internal investigation, determining liability, figuring out what went wrong, how Imogen operated for 5 years without detection, how Christina's murder happened on company property, how multiple executives committed crimes. He asks if I violated any company policies. I admit I probably did. Accessed files I shouldn't have. Investigated without authorization. Went to areas that were off limits. He writes it all down, thanks me for my honesty, says they'll be in touch. 2 days later, Isla Robertson from HR calls me, asks me to come to her office. She's sympathetic when I arrive, offers coffee, sits down across from me, tells me I'm being placed on paid administrative leave. The company needs to sort out the situation, determine what policies were violated, figure out their liability, decide how to handle the aftermath. She's clear that I broke multiple rules, investigated on my own instead of going through proper channels, accessed restricted files, entered unauthorized areas, involved colleagues in activities that put them at risk. But she acknowledges I was trying to help, trying to find out what happened to Christina. acting with good intentions even if my methods were wrong. The leave is paid, open-ended. She'll let me know when they've made decisions. I should stay available, not talk to media. Let the legal process play out. I leave her office feeling numb, not fired but not cleared either, suspended in uncertainty, waiting for other people to decide my fate. Derek calls me 3 days after Imogen's arrest. His voice sounds hollow over the phone. He asks if I can meet him at a coffee shop near his apartment. I drive over that afternoon and find him sitting at a corner table, looking like he hasn't slept in days. He stands when he sees me, then sits back down heavily. He tells me the FBI came to his house and explained everything, how Imogen was the one who killed Christina, how she'd been manipulating my investigation the whole time, how I'd been feeding her information while she covered her tracks. He thanks me for not giving up on finding out what happened. I tell him I'm sorry. Sorry I trusted Imogen. Sorry I didn't see through her lies sooner. He shakes his head and says I did more than anyone else. Says Christina would be grateful I kept searching even when everyone told me to stop. We sit there for a while, not talking. Finally, he tells me he's moving back to his hometown. Can't stay in this city anymore. Too many memories. Too much pain. We shake hands before he leaves. I watch him walk to his car and wonder if either of us will ever feel normal again. The next morning, I wake up to my phone buzzing constantly. Texts from friends, missed calls from numbers I don't recognize. I check the news and see my face staring back at me. The story broke overnight. Corporate murder, embezzlement schemes, FBI investigation. My name is everywhere. The article calls me both a hero who uncovered the truth and a fool who got manipulated by the killer. I turn off my phone, but the damage is done. By noon, there are reporters camped outside my apartment building, cameras pointed at my front door, vans with satellite dishes parked along the street. I peek through my blinds and see them waiting. One tries to buzz my apartment, then another. I stop answering. The building manager calls and asks me to make them leave. I tell her I can't control what reporters do. She's not happy, but what can I do? I order food delivery and have them leave it in the lobby. Only go out for FBI meetings and legal appointments. Even then, I wear a baseball cap and sunglasses. Take the back stairs. Try to avoid cameras. It doesn't always work. My photo shows up on evening news. People I haven't talked to in years reach out. Some supportive, others just curious. Want the inside story? I stop responding to most messages. Can't deal with explaining everything over and over. The attention makes me feel exposed. Like everyone is judging whether I should have known Imogen was lying, whether I'm smart or stupid, whether I helped or made things worse. Agent Cartwright calls me in 2 weeks later. Says he's assigning someone to help me prepare for trial. Detective Dominic Romero arrives at the FBI office the next day. He's maybe 40, calm demeanor, takes notes on everything, sits across from me with a thick folder of documents. He explains that prosecutors need my testimony to be airtight. Defense will try to discredit everything I say. We need to build a complete timeline of every interaction with Imogen. Every conversation, every piece of information she gave me, every suggestion she made. We start at the beginning, when Christina first disappeared, when I found the evidence folder in her desk. Romero asks who told me to check there. I have to think back. It was Imogen. She'd mentioned that Christina kept important files in her desk. I hadn't questioned it at the time. Romero writes it down, asks what else she suggested. I tell him about her pointing out Brad's strange behavior, Tom's scratches, Jericho's affair, all the leads that pointed away from her. Romero nods and keeps writing. We spend hours going through everything. He's patient, never rushes me, asks follow-up questions, wants specific details about dates and times, what exactly Imogen said, how she phrased things, what information I gave her in return. During our third meeting, Romero shows me something that makes my stomach drop. Computer forensic reports from the company servers. Files I thought I'd saved as evidence had been deleted. Not just deleted, but professionally wiped. Impossible to recover. Romero explains that Imogen had access to IT systems through her position. She'd been systematically destroying evidence even while pretending to help me investigate. Witnesses I'd planned to interview had been contacted by someone warning them to stay quiet. Security footage I'd wanted to review had been corrupted. Backup files mysteriously damaged. Romero walks me through each instance, shows me timestamps, proves Imogen did it all during the weeks I was confiding in her. Every lead I gave her, she eliminated. Every witness I mentioned, she scared off. Every piece of evidence I found, she destroyed. I'd been helping her cover up her crime while thinking I was solving it. The realization makes me feel sick. Romero sees my reaction and tells me it's not my fault. Says Imogen was a professional manipulator. Had been stealing from the company for 5 years without detection. Knew exactly how to play people. But his reassurance doesn't help much. The USB drive Derek gave the FBI becomes the key to everything. Romero shows me what's on it. Christina had downloaded Brad's embezzlement evidence like I'd found. But there's more. Preliminary evidence of another scheme. Fake consulting contracts. Inflated expense reports. Payments to shell companies. All pointing to Imogen. Christina had been investigating her before she even discovered Brad's crimes. The dates on the files show Christina had been gathering evidence on Imogen for 3 weeks before she disappeared. She'd figured it out. Knew Imogen was stealing. Was building a case. Romero explains that Imogen must have realized Christina was investigating her. That's why she killed her. Not to protect Brad or Jericho, to protect herself. Christina died because she'd discovered Imogen's scheme, and Imogen couldn't let her expose it. The USB drive has emails, bank records, transaction histories. Everything Christina had compiled before Imogen stopped her. It's all there. Proof of Imogen's crimes going back 5 years. $2 million stolen through careful, systematic fraud. Christina had almost completed her investigation, just needed a few more pieces. But Imogen killed her first. Prosecutor Camelia Lowry takes over the case a month after Imogen's arrest. She's in her 50s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense attitude. Calls me to her office downtown. Her desk is covered with file folders and legal documents. She tells me to sit and starts asking questions immediately. Wants to know about my relationship with Christina, why I started investigating, what made me suspicious. I explain everything again. She listens without interrupting, takes notes. When I finish, she leans back and looks at me hard, tells me the defense is going to tear me apart. They'll say I was obsessed with Christina, that I saw conspiracies everywhere, that I'm an unreliable witness who contaminated evidence and jumped to conclusions. They'll argue I had no training or authority to investigate, that everything I found is questionable because I didn't follow proper procedures. She asks if I can handle that, if I can sit on the stand while a lawyer calls me incompetent and delusional. I tell her I can. She nods but doesn't look convinced. Says we'll need to prepare extensively, go over my testimony until it's perfect, make sure I don't give the defense any openings. She's tough, but I appreciate her honesty. Better to know what's coming than be surprised in court. The preliminary hearing happens 6 weeks after Imogen's arrest. Imogen's lawyer stands up and argues she acted in self-defense, claims Christina attacked her first, says Imogen panicked and defended herself, that it was a tragic accident, not murder. The courtroom goes quiet. I can't believe what I'm hearing. Prosecutor Lowry objects immediately, points out that the recording clearly shows Christina begging for her life, pleading with Imogen to stop, asking why she was doing this. No indication of any attack. The medical examiner takes the stand, explains that Christina died from strangulation, that it took several minutes of sustained pressure, that there were no defensive wounds suggesting Christina fought back, that all evidence points to Christina being the victim, not the attacker. The judge denies the self-defense motion, rules that the case will proceed to trial. Imogen shows no reaction, just sits there looking calm, like this is all happening to someone else. Brad pleads guilty to embezzlement 2 months later, agrees to testify against Imogen in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutor brings him in for a proffer session, and I get to hear what he says. Brad admits that Imogen approached him the day after Christina's murder, told him she knew about his embezzlement, said Christina had discovered it and was going to report him, offered to help him cover it up if he'd help her with something. He'd been terrified, thought his life was over, agreed to whatever she wanted. Imogen told him to act suspicious, to shred documents, to make himself look guilty, said she'd make sure investigators focused on him instead of looking elsewhere. She also asked him to help move something heavy in the basement. He didn't know it was Christina's body at the time, just helped her brick up a wall section, realized later what he'd done. By then, he was too deep, too scared to come forward. Thought Imogen would kill him too if he talked. Jericho cuts a deal the following week. His lawyer negotiates immunity in exchange for testimony. Jericho admits that Imogen had manipulated him from the start. She'd told him Christina had run off with company money, that she'd discovered his affair and was planning to blackmail him, that his marriage and career were in danger. He'd been so focused on protecting himself that he'd never questioned her story, never asked for proof, just believed what she told him because it fit his fears. Imogen had played him perfectly, used his guilt about the affair, his worry about the divorce, his desire to protect his position. She'd made him see Christina as a threat instead of a victim, made him complicit in covering up her murder without him even realizing it. Tom's testimony is the worst. He breaks down on the stand describing what Imogen did to him, how he'd been doing his rounds that night and saw her bricking up a basement wall, asked what she was doing. She'd attacked him, scratched his arms, threatened to frame him for Christina's murder if he didn't help with the cover-up, told him she had evidence that would put him in prison for life. He'd been special forces, trained to handle combat, but Imogen had scared him more than any enemy ever had. She was cold, calculating, completely without fear or hesitation. He'd helped her corrupt the security footage, made the cameras malfunction for 6 hours, reported it as a technical issue, lived in terror for weeks that she'd kill him too. The jury listens to his testimony in silence. Several look shaken. Tom describes how Imogen had controlled him through fear, how she'd threatened his family, his career, everything he cared about, how he'd felt trapped with no way out until the FBI raid finally freed him. I spent weeks working with Lowry, going over every detail of my investigation and how Imogen had guided me. She helped me see that while I made mistakes, I ultimately did uncover the truth, even if I didn't realize who the real killer was until the end. We met 3 times a week at her office, spreading out folders and documents across her conference table. She walked me through each conversation I'd had with Imogen, pointing out how she'd steered me away from certain leads while pushing me toward others. Lowry showed me patterns I hadn't seen before, moments when Imogen had been too helpful or too quick with suggestions. The prosecutor told me my determination to find Christina had been right, even when my methods were wrong. She said without me refusing to let go, Imogen might have gotten away with murder. That helped some with the guilt, but not enough. 4 months after they found Christina's body, the trial started. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Imogen sitting at the defense table, looking calm and professional, made my stomach turn with a mixture of anger and leftover guilt. She wore a dark blue suit and had her hair pulled back. She looked exactly like the colleague I'd trusted, not like someone who'd killed Christina and manipulated me for weeks. Our eyes met once across the courtroom, and she gave me a small nod, like we were just running into each other at the office. That casual gesture made me feel sick. My testimony took 2 full days. I had to describe finding the evidence folder, every conversation with Imogen, how she'd seemed so helpful and concerned, and the moment I recognized her voice on Christina's recording. The prosecutor asked me to walk through my entire investigation step by step. I explained checking Christina's desk, finding Brad's embezzlement evidence, talking to Derek, meeting with Eddie, going to the basement. For each part, Lowry asked me what Imogen had said or done, how she'd reacted, what suggestions she'd made. The pattern became clear to the jury. Every time I got close to something that might point to Imogen, she'd redirected me toward Brad, Jericho, or Tom. When I mentioned checking security footage, she'd suggested starting with Brad's floor instead of the basement. When I wanted to talk to more janitors, she'd said Eddie was probably confused and unreliable. When I found Christina's ring in the basement, Imogen had been the one who suggested the fresh mortar might be from regular maintenance, nothing suspicious. Imogen's lawyer tried to discredit me during cross-examination, suggesting I had romantic feelings for Christina and was making up evidence to get revenge on anyone I could blame. He asked if I'd been jealous of Derek, if I'd wanted Christina for myself, if my whole investigation was driven by unrequited love rather than facts. Lowry objected repeatedly, and the judge shut down that line of questioning, saying the evidence spoke for itself, regardless of my personal feelings. The recording of Christina's final moments got played for the jury, and several people started crying. Hearing Christina's voice begging Imogen to stop, asking why she was doing this, made the entire courtroom go silent. You could hear Christina's fear, her confusion, her desperate attempts to reason with Imogen. The recording captured Christina saying they were friends, that she'd never told anyone about Imogen's scheme, that she just wanted to help her fix it before anyone found out. Imogen's voice on the recording was cold and flat, telling Christina she couldn't be trusted, that she'd already gathered too much evidence, that she'd eventually tell someone. Then you heard the struggle, Christina's gasps, her pleas getting weaker. Several jurors wiped their eyes. One woman in the back row had her hand over her mouth. Even the judge looked shaken. Imogen's defense tried to argue that the recording was unreliable, that Christina was confused from drugs, and Imogen was actually trying to help her. They claimed the sounds of struggle were Christina fighting against help, not fighting for her life. They suggested Imogen had found Christina already drugged and dying, had tried to save her, and the recording captured that failed rescue attempt. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The medical evidence of strangulation and the security footage of Imogen bricking up the wall destroyed that argument completely. The medical examiner testified that Christina's injuries were consistent with manual strangulation that took several minutes of sustained pressure. The bruising pattern on her neck matched hands, not an accidental injury. The footage showed Imogen mixing mortar, carrying bricks, carefully sealing up the wall section where they'd later find Christina's body. No one trying to save someone does that. Derek testified about Christina's fear in her final days, how she'd given him the USB drive for protection, and how someone had broken in to steal it. His grief was raw and real, and several jurors were clearly moved by his testimony. He described Christina coming home scared 3 nights before she disappeared, saying someone at work had threatened her. She wouldn't tell him who, just said she'd found something bad and needed to report it. Derek's voice broke when he talked about the last time he saw her, how she'd kissed him goodbye that morning and told him she loved him. He'd assumed they'd have dinner together that night. Instead, He spent weeks not knowing if she was alive or dead, then learned she'd been murdered by someone she considered a friend. Eddie testified about seeing Christina being forced toward the freight elevator, hearing her plead with someone. The prosecutor showed him Imogen's photo, and he positively identified her as the person he saw with Christina that night. Eddie described how Christina had seemed unsteady on her feet, like she was drunk or sick, and how the other person was supporting her, but also guiding her firmly toward the elevator. He'd heard Christina say something about not wanting to go downstairs, that she needed to go home. Eddie had assumed it was a co-worker helping a sick colleague, nothing suspicious. He'd gone back to his cleaning and thought nothing more of it until the FBI started asking questions. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. Christina's DNA was under Imogen's fingernails from where Christina had fought back. Imogen's fingerprints were on the bricks used to wall up Christina's body. Trace evidence placed Imogen at the murder scene. They'd found fibers from Imogen's jacket on Christina's clothes, soil from the basement on Imogen's shoes, and brick dust in Imogen's car. The forensic specialist walked the jury through each piece of evidence, explaining how it proved Imogen had killed Christina and then hidden her body. Imogen's financial records showed complicated money laundering and offshore accounts totaling over $2 million. The prosecution argued this proved she was willing to kill to protect her criminal business. They showed how Imogen had been stealing from the company for 5 years through fake consulting contracts, inflated expense reports, and diverted commissions. She'd built an entire system to hide the money, moving it through multiple accounts before sending it overseas. Christina had discovered it by accident while investigating Brad's embezzlement. The prosecution said Imogen saw Christina as a threat to everything she'd built, so she eliminated that threat permanently. The defense attorney stood up and announced she wanted to call character witnesses for Imogen. She said there were people who knew Imogen as a kind, honest person who would never commit murder. But when she started calling names, most of the people on her list refused to show up. The judge kept asking where the witnesses were, and the attorney kept making excuses about scheduling conflicts and personal emergencies. Finally, 3 people agreed to testify, but you could tell they didn't want to be there. The first witness was a woman from Imogen's gym who said Imogen was always polite and friendly. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor asked how well she actually knew Imogen, and the woman admitted they'd only talked a few times, and she didn't know anything about Imogen's work life. The second witness was a guy who lived in Imogen's apartment building, and he basically said the same thing, that she seemed nice in the hallway. The prosecutor asked if he'd ever been inside her apartment or spent any real time with her, and he said no. The third witness was someone Imogen used to work with at a different company 5 years ago, and even she seemed uncomfortable. She said Imogen had been a good employee back then, but when the prosecutor asked if they'd stayed in touch, she admitted Imogen had cut off contact years ago, and she was surprised to get the call to testify. None of them could say anything meaningful about who Imogen really was, or whether she was capable of murder. The jury looked bored during most of the testimony, and I could see a few of them exchanging glances like they couldn't believe this was the best the defense could do. Agent Cartwright took the stand next, and the prosecutor asked him to walk through the entire investigation. He explained how they'd found Imogen at the airport with a fake passport and over $2 million ready to transfer to offshore accounts. He showed the jury copies of the fake documents, explained the money trail, and described how Imogen had stayed calm and professional even when they arrested her. Then he talked about how Imogen had manipulated my investigation from the very beginning. He pulled out his notes and went through it step by step. When I'd found evidence of Brad's embezzlement, Imogen had been the one who suggested I focus on that angle. When I'd discovered Jericho's affair, Imogen had pointed out how it gave him motive to want Christina gone. When I'd noticed Tom's scratches, Imogen had been the one who brought up his military background and suggested he could be dangerous. Agent Cartwright explained that Imogen had used me like a weapon, pointing me at everyone else while making sure I never looked at her. She'd fed me just enough real information to keep me investigating, but always steered me away from anything that might expose her own crimes. The prosecutor asked how Imogen had known what I was finding, and Agent Cartwright said it was simple. I'd told her everything, every piece of evidence, every theory, every person I planned to talk to next. Imogen had complete access to my investigation because I'd trusted her and confided in her about everything. He said it was actually brilliant in a sick way, because the best way to control an investigation is to be part of it. The jury was paying close attention now, and several of them kept looking over at Imogen with disgust on their faces. Prosecutor Lowry stood up for her closing argument, and I could tell she was about to destroy Imogen. She walked slowly to the jury box and made eye contact with each juror before she started talking. She said this case was about a calculated killer who saw other people as obstacles to be removed. Christina had discovered Imogen's embezzlement scheme, so Imogen eliminated her. Then Imogen had manipulated an entire investigation to make sure she stayed invisible while everyone else took the blame. Lowry walked them through the evidence piece by piece. The recording of Christina begging for her life while Imogen strangled her. The security footage showing Imogen forcing Christina toward the basement. The forensic evidence proving Imogen had killed Christina and bricked up her body. The financial records showing Imogen had been stealing for 5 years. The fake passport and offshore accounts proving Imogen had planned to flee the country. Lowry's voice got stronger as she talked about how Imogen had shown zero remorse, zero humanity, zero conscience. She said Imogen had looked at Christina, a woman who'd given her a chance to make things right, and decided murder was easier than facing consequences. Then Imogen had spent weeks watching me search for Christina, knowing exactly where the body was, feeding me false leads, and manipulating my every move. Lowry said Imogen was a predator who'd been operating in plain sight for years, stealing money, and then killing anyone who threatened to expose her. She told the jury that Imogen had sat in that courtroom for weeks without showing any emotion, any regret, any sign that she understood she'd taken a human life. Lowry pointed at Imogen and said this was someone who saw murder as a business decision, and that made her one of the most dangerous people who would ever sit in their courtroom. The defense attorney got up for her closing argument and tried to create doubt about the investigation. She said I was just some amateur who'd been obsessed with Christina and had contaminated evidence by investigating on my own instead of going to the police right away. She suggested that the FBI had been sloppy, that the recording might not be reliable, that the security footage was grainy and unclear. She said maybe Imogen had been trying to help Christina that night, and things had gone wrong accidentally. She argued that the financial crimes and the murder were separate issues, and just because Imogen had stolen money didn't prove she was a killer. But you could tell the jury wasn't buying it. After weeks of testimony, after hearing Christina's voice on that recording, after seeing all the evidence, the defense's arguments sounded weak and desperate. The attorney kept saying there was reasonable doubt, but she couldn't point to any actual evidence that supported a different version of events. She couldn't explain away the recording, the forensic evidence, the fake passport, or Imogen's own admission that she'd killed Christina. When she sat down, the courtroom was quiet, and I could see several jurors shaking their heads slightly. The jury went out to deliberate, and I sat in the hallway with Derek, both of us too nervous to talk much. Agent Cartwright came by and told us it could take days, that we should go home and wait for the call. But 6 hours later, we got word that the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone rushed back to the courtroom, and I felt sick as we waited for the jury to file in. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict, and the foreperson said yes. The clerk read out the charges one by one. First-degree murder, guilty. Embezzlement, guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. Conspiracy, guilty. Guilty on every single count. I looked over at Imogen, and she didn't react at all. Her face was completely blank, like she was thinking about something else entirely. She didn't cry, didn't gasp, didn't show any emotion. She just stared straight ahead, like the verdict had nothing to do with her. Derek grabbed my hand, and I realized I was shaking. The judge thanked the jury and set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later. Then the bailiffs took Imogen away in handcuffs. I watched her walk out of the courtroom with that same blank expression, and it hit me that she really didn't feel anything about what she'd done. 3 weeks later, we were back in court for sentencing. The judge asked if anyone wanted to give victim impact statements, and Derek stood up first. He walked to the front of the courtroom holding a piece of paper that was shaking in his hands. He started talking about Christina's dreams for their future, how she'd wanted to make partner and start a family and travel to all the places they'd talked about. His voice broke when he described how excited she'd been about their wedding, how she'd already picked out her dress and booked the venue. He said Christina had been kind to everyone, always willing to help a colleague or mentor someone new, and she'd worked incredibly hard to build her career. Then Derek talked about how Imogen had stolen all of that for money. He said Christina had given Imogen a chance to make things right, had confronted her privately, and offered her a way out, but Imogen had chosen to kill her instead. Derek's voice cracked, and he had to stop several times to collect himself, but he got through the whole statement. He looked directly at Imogen and said Christina had trusted her, had considered her a friend, and Imogen had murdered her for it. When Derek sat down, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom except for Imogen's. The judge asked if anyone else wanted to speak, and I stood up, my legs feeling weak. I walked to the front and started talking about how Imogen's manipulation had destroyed my ability to trust anyone. I explained that I'd confided in her completely, had told her every fear and every discovery, and she'd used all of it against me. I said I'd been so focused on finding Christina that I'd never stopped to question why Imogen was helping me, why she was always there with suggestions and support. I told the judge that while I was grateful I'd helped uncover the truth eventually, I would always carry guilt for not seeing through Imogen's lies sooner. If I'd been smarter, less trusting, maybe I could have figured it out before the FBI had to spell it out for me. I said Imogen had turned my grief and determination into weapons she could use to protect herself, and that betrayal was something I'd be processing for the rest of my life. I looked at Imogen and said I'd never understand how someone could be so cold, so calculating, so completely empty of normal human feeling. Then I sat back down, feeling drained and hollow. The judge looked at Imogen and asked if she wanted to say anything before sentencing. Imogen stood up, but didn't speak. She just shook her head once and sat back down. The judge's expression hardened, and she started talking about how she'd been on the bench for 20 years and rarely encountered someone as calculating and remorseless as Imogen. She said the evidence showed Imogen had committed premeditated murder to cover up her own crimes, then manipulated an entire investigation to stay hidden. The judge said what made Imogen particularly dangerous was her complete lack of conscience, her ability to fake friendship and concern while coldly planning her next move. She said Imogen had shown no remorse during the trial, no recognition that she'd done anything wrong, no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. The judge sentenced Imogen to life in prison without possibility of parole for the murder conviction. Then she added consecutive sentences for the embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy charges, stacking years on top of the life sentence. She told Imogen that her calculated cruelty and total lack of remorse made her a danger to everyone around her, and society needed to be permanently protected from people like her. The bailiffs took Imogen away, and she still showed no emotion, just walked out of the courtroom like she was leaving a boring meeting. Derek and I walked out of the courthouse together into the bright afternoon sun. We were both exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Derek said he felt like he could finally start to grieve properly now that justice had been served. I told him I understood, that there had been this horrible limbo period where we couldn't move forward because we were still fighting for the truth. We stood on the courthouse steps, not really knowing what to say to each other. Finally, Derek told me that Christina would be grateful I'd never given up searching for the truth, even when I was manipulated and used. He said she'd always believed in doing the right thing no matter how hard it was, and I'd honored that belief by refusing to let her disappearance be swept under the rug. We hugged and promised to stay in touch, both knowing that our connection was built on shared trauma, but also mutual respect and understanding. A few days later, Gregory Woodard called me into his office. The company had settled with Christina's family for an undisclosed amount, and they were implementing new financial oversight procedures to prevent future embezzlement. Woodard said the board wanted me to return to work, that they recognized I'd been trying to do the right thing by investigating Christina's disappearance. But sitting in that office, looking at the same walls and hallways where Christina had worked, where Imogen had manipulated me, where so much had gone wrong, I knew I couldn't do it. I told Woodard I appreciated the offer, but I needed to move on to something else. He seemed to understand and said they'd give me a good reference whenever I was ready to look for a new position. Walking out of that building for the last time felt like closing a chapter that had nearly destroyed me. I spent the next 3 days clearing out my desk and finishing up whatever loose ends I could handle. Gregory Woodard processed my resignation paperwork without much fuss, probably relieved to have one less complication to deal with. The company was already scrambling to contain the damage from the scandal, bringing in crisis management consultants and fielding calls from angry clients who wanted to know if their accounts had been compromised. On my last day, I walked through the office one final time, past Christina's empty desk that nobody had touched, past the conference room where we'd celebrated her big sale just weeks ago, past the elevator where Imogen had smiled at me every morning while hiding what she'd done. I handed my badge to security and walked out into the parking lot, feeling like I could finally breathe properly for the first time in months. Agent Cartwright called me that evening and asked how I was holding up. I told him honestly that I felt lost, like I didn't know who to trust anymore or how to move forward. He said he'd seen this kind of trauma before in people who'd been manipulated by someone they trusted completely, and he gave me the name of a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from betrayal. I made an appointment for the following week, figuring I had nothing to lose. The therapist's office was in a quiet building downtown, decorated with plants and soft lighting that was probably supposed to be calming. I sat on her couch and told her everything from the beginning, how I'd started investigating Christina's disappearance, how Imogen had offered to help me, how I'd trusted her with every piece of evidence I found. The therapist listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally, her expression neutral and professional. When I finished, she asked me what I felt most guilty about. I said I felt responsible for Christina's death because if I'd been smarter, if I'd seen through Imogen's manipulation sooner, maybe I could have saved her. The therapist shook her head and told me that was faulty thinking. that Imogen had killed Christina before I even started investigating, and that my determination to find the truth had ultimately brought her justice. Over the next few months, I saw her twice a week, working through the layers of guilt and self-blame that had built up. She helped me understand that while I'd made mistakes in trusting Imogen, I'd also done something important by refusing to give up when everyone else wanted Christina's disappearance swept under the rug. She pointed out that without my investigation, Imogen would have gotten away with murder and continued stealing from the company, probably hurting more people down the line. That perspective helped, though the nightmares about hearing Christina's voice on that recording still woke me up most nights. The sentencing hearings for Brad, Jericho, and Tom happened over several weeks. Brad got 5 years in federal prison for embezzlement, his lawyer arguing for leniency because he'd cooperated with prosecutors and testified against Imogen. The judge wasn't particularly sympathetic, pointing out that he'd stolen millions and then helped cover up a murder to save himself. Jericho lost his position as CEO, and the board forced him to resign in disgrace. His wife took him for everything in the divorce settlement, walking away with $30 million plus half his stake in the company. Tom got probation for obstruction of justice after his lawyer successfully argued that Imogen had threatened and manipulated him into helping with the cover-up. The judge made it clear that Tom was lucky he'd cooperated fully once the FBI arrested him, or he'd be joining Brad in federal prison. I didn't attend any of the hearings because I couldn't stomach being in the same room as these people who'd all played a part in what happened to Christina, even if some of them were more guilty than others. 6 months after the trial ended, I got a call from a corporate ethics consulting firm that had read about the case in the business press. They were looking for someone with real-world experience investigating fraud and corporate crime, someone who understood how these schemes worked from the inside. The job would involve helping companies improve their internal controls, training employees to recognize warning signs of fraud, and developing better whistleblower protection programs. I met with their managing partner over coffee and found myself actually interested in the work for the first time since everything happened. My experience with Christina's case had taught me exactly what goes wrong when companies don't have proper oversight and when employees are too scared to report crimes they discover. The firm offered me a position as a senior consultant, and I accepted. It felt good to have a purpose again, to turn what happened into something that might prevent other people from going through the same nightmare. Derek and I started meeting for coffee every few months, usually at a place halfway between our apartments. We'd talk about how we were coping, share updates on therapy progress, and sometimes just sit in comfortable silence because we both understood what the other was going through. Derek told me he'd started dating someone new, a woman he'd met through friends who knew nothing about what happened with Christina and Imogen. He said it was hard learning to trust again, always wondering if people were being honest with him or if they had hidden motives. I understood completely because I felt the same way about every new person I met through work or social situations. Our friendship was strange, built entirely on shared trauma and the bond of having both been fooled by Imogen's manipulation, but it was also genuine in a way that felt rare and valuable. We'd both loved Christina in different ways, and we'd both been used as pawns in Imogen's game, and that created a connection that didn't need much explanation or justification. 8 months after Imogen's conviction, I got a call from a congressional aide asking if I'd be willing to testify before a committee investigating corporate fraud and whistleblower protections. They were looking at recent cases where employees had discovered crimes and either been silenced or faced retaliation, and Christina's story fit exactly what they were studying. I flew to Washington and spent a full day in a hearing room, answering questions from senators and representatives about what Christina had found, how the company had failed to protect her, and what changes might have saved her life. I talked about how she'd been gathering evidence for months, clearly terrified but determined to do the right thing, and how the lack of strong whistleblower protections had left her vulnerable to someone like Imogen, who saw her as a threat to eliminate rather than a colleague to support. Several committee members seemed genuinely moved by the testimony, and one senator said she'd be introducing legislation to strengthen federal whistleblower protections and require companies to have better internal reporting mechanisms. I left Washington feeling like maybe Christina's death could lead to changes that would protect other people in similar situations, which was the only comfort I'd found in the whole terrible experience. The company where Christina and I had worked announced it was shutting down about a year after the scandal broke. Too many clients had pulled their business, too many talented employees had left for competitors, and the reputation damage was just too severe to recover from. I read the announcement online and felt conflicted about it. Part of me was glad that the place where so much had gone wrong was finally closing, that the culture that had enabled people like Imogen and Brad to operate for years was dismantled. But I also felt bad for the innocent employees who'd lost their jobs through no fault of their own, people who'd just been trying to do their work and support their families while criminals operated around them. The whole situation was messy and complicated, with no clean villains and heroes, just a lot of people who'd made different choices that led to one woman being murdered and dozens of others having their lives disrupted. Agent Cartwright called me one afternoon to tell me that Imogen had tried to appeal her conviction. She'd argued that the recording from Christina's phone should have been inadmissible, that her rights had been violated during the investigation, and that she deserved a new trial. The appeals court had denied everything and upheld her conviction, meaning she'd spend the rest of her life in prison, exactly as the judge had sentenced. Cartwright said Imogen still showed no remorse according to the prison reports, still acted like she'd done nothing wrong except get caught. She apparently spent her time in prison reading business books and writing letters to former colleagues trying to maintain connections, as if she might somehow return to corporate life someday. The complete lack of guilt or recognition of what she'd done was almost harder to process than the murder itself. This idea that Imogen genuinely believed she'd been justified in killing Christina to protect her embezzlement scheme. I wrote an article for a major business journal about recognizing manipulation in the workplace, focusing on the warning signs I'd missed with Imogen. I described how she'd seemed so helpful and supportive, how she'd guided my investigation while actually covering her own tracks, and how her manipulation had been so subtle that I'd never suspected her until I heard her voice on that recording. The article got a lot of attention, with several companies reaching out afterward to ask if I'd come speak to their employees about ethics and internal fraud. I started doing speaking engagements in addition to my consulting work, standing in front of rooms full of corporate employees and telling them Christina's story, explaining how fraud happens not because of obvious criminals, but because of people who seem normal and trustworthy, right up until they're exposed. The work felt meaningful in a way my old sales job never had, like I was actually making a difference instead of just chasing commission checks. My new career helping companies prevent fraud and protect whistleblowers became the center of my life over the following months. I worked with firms to develop better internal controls, trained managers to recognize warning signs of embezzlement, and helped create reporting systems that would protect employees who discovered crimes from facing retaliation. Every time I helped a company implement stronger protections, I thought about Christina and how these changes might have saved her life if they'd been in place at our old firm. The work was challenging and sometimes frustrating because many executives resisted changes that might expose problems in their organizations. But it was also deeply satisfying because I could see the direct impact of what I was doing. Christina's death wasn't meaningless if it led to changes that protected other potential whistleblowers from meeting the same fate, if it made even a few companies take ethics and oversight more seriously than they had before. I'd been working in fraud prevention for about 18 months when Derek called to tell me he was getting married. He'd met someone at a grief support group, another person who understood loss and trauma, and they'd connected over shared experiences of healing. The wedding invitation arrived 2 weeks later, cream-colored paper with simple black text and holding. It made me realize how much time had passed since the trial ended. Derek asked me to be a groomsman, said I'd been there for him during the darkest period of his life, and he wanted me standing beside him during this happy moment. The ceremony was small, just close friends and family at a garden venue outside the city. Watching Derek smile as his bride walked down the aisle, seeing genuine joy on his face instead of the haunted look he'd carried for so long, gave me this strange feeling of hope. If he could move forward after losing Christina so brutally, after being manipulated and threatened and having his whole world destroyed, maybe I could too. The reception was warm and relaxed, people laughing and dancing, and Derek pulled me aside at one point to thank me again for never giving up on finding out what happened to Christina. He said she would have wanted both of us to find happiness again, to not let Imogen's evil destroy our entire lives. My therapist had been pushing me for months to try dating again, pointing out that I'd isolated myself socially since the trial ended. I'd thrown myself into work, helping companies build better fraud detection systems and whistleblower protections, but my personal life had basically stopped existing. Every time I thought about trusting someone new, about opening up to another person, I remembered how completely Imogen had fooled me, how I'd told her everything, confided all my fears and theories, while she was actively covering up Christina's murder. The therapist said this wariness was normal after experiencing that level of betrayal, but she kept encouraging me not to let one evil person make me cynical about everyone. So I started saying yes when coworkers were invited me out after work, joined a running club to meet people outside the corporate world, downloaded one of those dating apps everyone used. The first few dates were awkward and uncomfortable, me second-guessing everything the other person said, looking for signs of manipulation or deception. But gradually, it got easier. I learned to recognize the difference between normal human flaws and actual red flags, between someone having a bad day and someone trying to control me. 2 years after Christina died, her parents established a scholarship fund in her name for women pursuing business careers. They wanted to honor her ambition and determination, her refusal to stay quiet about corruption, even when it put her in danger. The announcement ceremony was held at a hotel conference room downtown, about 50 people attending, including former colleagues, Derek and his wife, and several reporters covering the story. Christina's mother gave a speech about her daughter's courage and integrity, how she'd always stood up for what was right, even when it cost her personally. Then she called me up to the front and thanked me publicly for refusing to accept the lie that Christina had just quit and disappeared, for investigating until I found the truth, even though it nearly got me killed too. She said the scholarship would help other young women follow Christina's example of speaking up against wrongdoing, and that my determination to find justice had inspired the family to create something positive from their tragedy. Standing there accepting their gratitude while fighting back tears, I felt this weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Christina's death had meaning now, her sacrifice leading to real change that would protect others. I met Rachel at a corporate ethics conference 6 months after the scholarship announcement. She was another consultant, worked for a firm that specialized in internal investigations and compliance programs, and we ended up sitting next to each other during a panel discussion about whistleblower retaliation. We started talking during the break, discovered we had similar philosophies about corporate accountability and protecting employees who reported crimes. She asked me to coffee after the conference ended, and we spent 3 hours discussing cases we'd worked on, the challenges of changing corporate culture, the satisfaction of actually making a difference. I was careful at first, watching for any signs that she wasn't genuine, that she might be manipulating me somehow. But Rachel was direct and honest, called me out when I got too guarded or suspicious, understood why I struggled with trust after what happened with Imogen. We started dating slowly, coffee meetings turning into dinners, weekend hikes, eventually trips together to visit clients in different cities. Being able to trust someone again, to open up about my fears and vulnerabilities without constantly watching for betrayal, felt like winning back a piece of myself that Imogen had stolen. 3 years after Imogen's trial, I woke up one morning in my apartment and realized I'd slept through the entire night without nightmares for the first time in months. Rachel was beside me, still asleep, and sunlight was coming through the windows, and I just felt peaceful. My consulting work was going well, helping companies implement stronger fraud controls and whistleblower protections, traveling to speak at conferences about recognizing manipulation and corporate crime. Rachel and I had moved in together 6 months earlier, her stuff mixed with mine in the closet, her coffee mug sitting next to mine in the kitchen. I still thought about Christina sometimes, remembered her laugh and her determination and the way she'd refused to back down when she discovered Brad's embezzlement. But those thoughts didn't consume me anymore, didn't wake me up at 3 in the morning with panic attacks and guilt. Christina's death had changed the direction of my life completely, led me to work that actually mattered instead of just chasing sales commissions. But I'd finally reached a point where I could remember her without being destroyed by the memory. Agent Cartwright called me out of the blue on a Tuesday afternoon, said he was retiring from the FBI after 30 years and wanted to talk before he left. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd first told him about finding Christina's evidence folder, back when I'd been terrified and desperate and had no idea who to trust. Cartwright looked older now, more gray in his hair, tired lines around his eyes from decades of investigating terrible crimes. He told me the Christina case had been one of the most complex and satisfying investigations of his career, not because of the violence or drama, but because of how it demonstrated that determination and integrity could overcome even sophisticated manipulation. He said my refusal to give up, even when Imogen was actively guiding me away from the truth, had ultimately made all the difference in solving the case. If I'd accepted the easy answers, believed Christina had just run off or been killed by Brad or Jericho, Imogen would have gotten away with murder. Cartwright shook my hand as we left, said he was proud of the work I was doing now, helping companies prevent the kind of fraud and retaliation that had led to Christina's death. Derek called me again a year later, his voice excited and nervous, asking if Rachel and I could come over for dinner because he had big news to share. His wife was pregnant. They'd just found out they were having a girl, and Derek wanted to tell me in person that they'd decided to give her Christina as a middle name. He said Christina would have been an amazing aunt, would have spoiled the baby and taught her to be strong and brave and never accept injustice. They wanted to make sure their daughter grew up knowing the story of the woman she was named after, understanding that Christina had died trying to do the right thing and that her courage had inspired real change. Sitting in Derek's living room, looking at ultrasound photos and talking about the future instead of the past. I felt grateful that something good had come from all the darkness and pain. Christina's legacy would live on not just in scholarship funds and corporate policies, but in this child who would carry her name and learn about her bravery. I'd been planning the proposal for weeks, trying to find the perfect moment and place, but in the end, I just asked Rachel one Saturday morning while we were making breakfast in our apartment. We'd been together almost 2 years, living together for over a year, and I couldn't imagine my life without her anymore. She'd helped me learn to trust again, to open up about my fears and trauma without feeling weak or broken, to believe that not everyone was secretly manipulating me. I got down on one knee right there in the kitchen, pancakes burning on the stove, and asked if she'd marry me. Rachel said yes immediately, laughing and crying at the same time, and planning our future together felt like the final step in reclaiming my life from everything Imogen had stolen. We spent the rest of that day calling family and friends, telling everyone our news, and I realized I was genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been since before Christina disappeared. The wedding was 6 months later. Small ceremony at a vineyard with about 60 guests, including Derek and his family. Rachel's parents flew in from across the country. My brother came with his kids. Agent Cartwright even showed up with his wife to congratulate us. Derek gave a toast during the reception about how tragedy can lead to unexpected connections and growth, how the worst experiences of our lives sometimes open doors to relationships and opportunities we never would have found otherwise. He said that while we both wished Christina could be there celebrating with us, we were grateful for the friendship that came from supporting each other through the darkest time of our lives. His words made half the room cry, including Rachel, but they also felt true and important. Christina's death had been terrible and wrong and should never have happened, but the connections formed in the aftermath, the changes we'd all made to honor her memory, those things mattered too. My consulting firm landed a major contract with a Fortune 500 company 2 months after the wedding, hired to completely overhaul their ethics and whistleblower protection programs after a series of fraud scandals. The project would take over a year, involve training hundreds of employees and managers, redesigning reporting systems and investigation procedures. Standing in the boardroom giving my first presentation to their executive team, explaining how to create a culture where employees felt safe reporting crimes instead of being punished for it, I thought about Christina and her courage in gathering evidence against Brad, even though she knew the risk. Her refusal to stay silent about corruption, even when it cost her everything, had inspired the work I did now. The memorial event took place at a beautiful garden venue with white tents and flowers everywhere. Christina's parents had organized everything perfectly. Over 100 people showed up, including former colleagues I hadn't seen in years, Derek and his family, even some of Christina's old friends from college. The scholarship fund had grown significantly over the past 5 years. They'd already given out 12 scholarships to young women studying business. Christina's mom spoke first, thanking everyone for coming and remembering her daughter. Then Derek talked about Christina's courage and determination. When it was my turn, I walked up to the microphone feeling nervous but ready. I spoke about how Christina had refused to stay silent about corruption, even when it cost her everything. She'd gathered evidence knowing the risk. She'd tried to do the right thing. Her bravery had inspired changes in whistleblower protection laws and corporate oversight. The audience clapped when I finished. Afterwards, people came up to share their own memories of Christina. It felt good to remember her this way, not just as a victim, but as someone who'd made a real difference. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the prison system. Imogen had been denied parole again. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars. I felt some satisfaction hearing that news. But I'd learned over the years that real closure didn't come from her punishment. It came from building a meaningful life and career from the tragedy. My consulting work helping companies protect whistleblowers felt important. Rachel and I had a good marriage. Derek had his family. We'd all moved forward despite the pain Imogen had caused. Looking back on everything that happened, I could see the positive changes that came from it all. Christina's determination to expose corruption had led to stronger whistleblower protections across multiple industries. My refusal to give up investigating had brought justice for her family. Corporate oversight had improved because of the scandal. We'd both paid heavy prices. Christina paid with her life. I paid with trauma and broken trust that took years to heal. But the fight had been worth it. Christina's legacy lived on through the scholarship fund and the laws that now protected other whistleblowers. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, but it still matters. That's it for today's story. Thanks for sharing a few minutes of your day with me. I hope this one reminded you that there's still good out there.